Thank you very much for being here. Thank you to the Canadian Club of Calgary for hosting this event and to the Calgary Petroleum Club for welcoming me back. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement. It was exactly 9 years ago today that Mr. Harper was sworn in as Canada's 22nd Prime Minister. Now, as I'm sure you can expect, I'm going to have some critical things to say about what he has and what I feel he hasn't accomplished. But like many of you, I have a great deal of respect for the office he holds, for the institution he leads, and I'd like to thank him for his many years of public service. Mr. Harper built on a political movement that put the concerns of Western Canadians at the center of our national political life. The West got in, and regardless of who forms the next government, it will remain in. There are also some local congratulations in order. This week, the world acknowledged something that Calgarians already knew, that Naheed Nenshi really is one of the world's greatest mayors. And last fall, you welcomed a new premier, a former parliamentary colleague of mine, and someone I hope to work with again as a partner if I'm elected Prime Minister. At the same time, I know the news here hasn't been all good. The decline in oil prices is going to hit the Canadian economy hard. It already has, and nowhere more so than here in Alberta. We still don't have any progress on the Keystone XL pipeline. It's no closer to being approved today than it was when I last spoke here at the Petroleum Club in 2013. If anything, a presidential veto looks more and more likely. We're still struggling. Those of you who work in the energy sector know this best. To repair our reputation at home and abroad when it comes to the environment. The Harper Conservatives' inaction is drawing more and more negative attention from the international community, including important trading partners. And the last of those two things, the lack of progress on Keystone and our still damaged reputation, are squarely the result of the other thing this federal government has failed to deliver: a sensible, credible approach to the environment and the economy. The simple fact is that in 2015, pretending that we have to choose between the economy and the environment is as harmful as it is wrong. Premier Prentice made a similar argument when he said that focusing on environmental policy isn't exclusively a question of morality. Increasingly, it's an economic imperative, especially in an increasingly competitive world market for natural resources. You don't have to be Prime Minister for 9 years to know that such uncertainty calls for greater diplomacy, not less. Calling people names, issuing ultimatums, that does nothing in practical, meaningful, measurable terms to advance the interests of Canada's resource sector. All it does is further alienate people of goodwill at home and abroad. And without their support, it becomes difficult to acquire the social license needed to get projects past the planning stages. Now, I understand that appeals to social license can seem to you to be sometimes like an excuse to prevent projects from getting built. But I also understand that companies alone cannot achieve social license to create the growth and jobs we need. And make no mistake, Canadians want that growth and need those jobs. What many call social license, I think is better understood as public trust, for that's what it is at its core. From one project to the next, credibility has been compromised, and Canadians no longer feel that they can trust their federal government to protect their best interests. They don't trust that we're living up to our international obligations to cut greenhouse gas emissions. And they're right. With 5 years to go, we're nowhere near meeting the emission reduction targets that Mr. Harper committed us to in Copenhagen. Canadians don't trust that we're respecting the rights of Aboriginal peoples. As key players and partners in development, Aboriginal Canadians have a legal and constitutionally protected right to be consulted on major projects that impact on their rights, yet the current government treats this as this serious responsibility as an afterthought. Again, your Premier made that point himself when he was Vice Chair of CIBC. And Canadians also don't trust that there is adequate oversight in the approval process. It's hard to argue with that perspective when you have a government that buries significant changes to environmental protection laws deep in its massive budget and loudly proclaims their support for a project before hearings have even been completed. These efforts to avoid debate and circumvent a fair review undermine public trust in government. And once there's a deficit of public trust, it's hard to get anything accomplished. In short, a lack of environmental stewardship is paralyzing major resource projects. So where does that leave us? If we want to restore our international reputation, something we need to do to create jobs and spur investment, we must take action, and we must do it now. If we want to get our resources moving, the federal government must act to regain the public trust here at home. And that starts with a mature and honest conversation about carbon pricing. Now, I know that many in this room believe that a price on carbon is good for the environment, for the economy, and for Alberta's oil and gas sector. Many companies already include a shadow carbon price in their financial and business modeling. You know Canada needs to have a price on carbon. The good news is, we're already well on our way. In spite of Mr. Harper's hostility to the idea, British Columbia, Alberta, Quebec, and soon Ontario have all committed in various forms to a price on carbon. Combined, those jurisdictions represent over 86% of the Canadian economy. They are doing this because they know that climate change is real, that our children's future requires us to reduce carbon emissions, and that carbon pricing is an effective way to get us there. The problem is that the provincial approaches are uncoordinated and limited by lack of federal leadership. There's no way to ensure that all regions of the country are doing their part. It makes it difficult for the federal government to speak confidently and proudly for all Canadians about our environmental efforts when we talk to US legislators or international negotiators. These diverse political approaches do have one thing going for them, though. They reveal the genius of Canadian federalism. The efforts in Canadian provinces show once again that regional leadership can move Canada forward. So today, I want to share with you one of the most important things I've learned during my time in public life, which is this: the federal government doesn't have all the answers. I know, big shock to those of you in Alberta. The problems that Canadians face cannot be solved by Ottawa alone. Making progress on the things that matter to us requires real engagement with provincial and territorial, municipal and Aboriginal governments, along with a healthy respect for regional differences. When the federal government ignores these regional distinctions, discounts provincial or territorial perspectives, our country is weakened not strengthened. This was the case when the federal government pushed the National Energy Program over the strong opposition of Western Canada generally and Alberta in particular. Look, Canadians know we're in this together. A federal program that harms one part of the country harms us all. And for those of you who think that the National Energy Program was before my time, trust me, I get reminded of it every time I stop by Calgary in Alberta. We have enough forces in this country trying to pull us apart. We need national leadership that brings us together. So make no mistake, there is a clear need for federal leadership when it comes to energy and the environment. Any serious plan to reduce carbon emissions in Canada requires a federal government that is open, engaged, and committed to partnering with provinces and territories. But let's not minimize what provinces have already accomplished. Ontario shut down its coal plants. British Columbia has created a successful and comprehensive revenue-neutral carbon tax. Quebec started with a form of carbon tax and is shifting to a broader cap-and-trade solution with California. And here in Alberta, you've pioneered a more flexible system that combines regulations on emissions with trading and payment options. Though the methods vary, the provinces have chosen emissions reduction programs that make sense for their own economic contexts and priorities. And that's a good thing. The ball is rolling in Canada. Governments and industry are beginning to embrace the opportunities to be found in clean technology and renewable energy. We've seen provinces move to price carbon in ways that help rather than hurt their local economies. Well, I intend to build on these provincial initiatives. The New Democrats, well, they talk about a one-size-fits-all solution that starts in Ottawa. And Mr. Harper's Conservatives, well, let's be honest, they don't seem interested in any solution on this at all. We know that federal leadership goes beyond federal programs. That's why we want to build on existing provincial initiatives in the spirit of Canadian federalism. Think about that. Some of our greatest achievements as a country, the things that matter in the daily lives of Canadians, came about when federal, provincial, and territorial governments worked together to forge solutions to complex problems. There are many examples. There's a Canada Pension Plan, which provides some peace of mind to Canadians as they face retirement. The National Child Benefit, that gives low-income families the support they need to make sure their kids don't go hungry. There's also the Gas Tax Fund, negotiated with the provinces, that sees $2 billion a year transferred directly to municipalities to support local infrastructure projects. But the one example that touches all Canadians in a profound and personal way is Medicare. Our public health care system began as an ambitious and visionary experiment in Saskatchewan. Gradually, over time, other provinces and territories adopted similar models, and the federal government, at key moments, provided leadership. What the federal government did was identify principles of care and enshrined them in the Canada Health Act. The federal government encouraged provinces and territories to experiment and design healthcare systems that met their own circumstances, so long as the principles of the Canada Health Act were respected. And the federal government became a significant financial partner in the achievement of this national healthcare vision. Now, our healthcare system isn't perfect, but it does represent the best of Canadian federalism. It's flexible enough to respond to different regional needs while protecting the national principles Canadians hold dear. That's the approach I would bring to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. As it stands, the provinces and territories have their own carbon reduction targets, which, added together, are quite similar to the targets that the Prime Minister committed Canada to. But as I mentioned, we're not collectively on track to meet those targets, not even close. As many of you know, the United Nations Climate Change Conference is scheduled for early December in Paris. If I have the privilege of forming a government in the fall, I will go to the Paris conference with two messages for our international partners. Number one, Canada takes its environmental responsibilities seriously, and we will do more in the fight against climate change. We will lead on climate change because it's the right thing to do and because it's good for our economy. Number two, getting our resources to market is a priority for Canadians, and we know that that economic success depends on us keeping our word on the environment. In Copenhagen, we endured the spectacle of Canadian premiers attacking the Canadian government. Well, we should go to Paris together with a common purpose. And when we get home, I will meet with provincial and territorial leaders within 90 days to implement a pan-Canadian framework to reduce carbon emissions across Canada. Make no mistake, nothing is more important to the Canadian economy than getting this right. Lors de notre retour de Paris, je vais rencontrer les premiers ministres provinciaux et territoriaux dans les 90 jours qui suivront afin de mettre en place un plan pan-canadien pour réduire nos émissions de carbone. Soyons clairs, cette collaboration est primordiale pour le succès de l'économie canadienne. Canada will establish emissions reduction targets informed by the best economic and scientific analysis. All provinces and territories will have to do their share. But let's be honest, targets aren't enough. We need effective policies to be put in place so we can meet them. So as a federal government, we will set in place a national standard in partnership with provinces and territories, one that gives them the flexibility to design their own policies to achieve those targets, including their own carbon pricing policies. And we will provide targeted funding, targeted federal funding, to provinces and territories to help them achieve their goals. In the same way that federal funding through the Canada Health Transfer is designed to support provinces and territories in achieving the goals of the Canada Health Act. We all know that there are huge opportunities across Canada for investment in cleaner energy, efficiency, public transport, and more. But it's provinces, territories, municipalities, and communities that are often best placed to identify the top priorities where they live. We need to start a new conversation in Canada, one that represents a respectful dialogue between governments and Canadians, one that positions Canada to be competitive in a global economy focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, one that reflects the best of who we are and shows it to the world. On an issue as challenging as climate change, in a country as diverse as Canada, we need a practical and pragmatic solution. I'm proud of the one we're putting forward today. History shows that Canada works best when all orders of government get together to solve the problems that matter to Canadians. Reducing carbon emissions and fighting climate change matter to me, they matter to Canadians, and they matter to the world. It's time we stepped up. leader of the Liberal Party of Canada. My last name is Trudeau, and I'm standing here at the Petroleum Club in Calgary. I understand how energy issues can divide this country. But I also know that strong leadership can see us through the challenges we face. Not leadership by fiat, but leadership that listens, that respects our differences while bringing people together and keeping the door open to new and innovative ideas. I'm optimistic about Canada's future, and I know you are too. If we commit to the plan I've outlined today, we can repair our broken relationship and restore our public trust. I've spent a lot of time in Alberta, and I know people here want what all Canadians want. You want your children and your grandchildren to grow up healthy and prosperous. You want to leave a better country for your kids than you inherited from your parents. Canadians have solved bigger problems, and we'll solve this one too. And we will do it in the way that we always have, by working together. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.